Welcome to the Health and Wealth Power Hour, the podcast that provides you with the knowledge and insights you need to achieve physical, mental, and financial well-being. I'm your host, Harlan Pickett, a business consultant who's passionate about helping people achieve a more balanced and healthier life. Each week, we'll deep dive into topics related to health and wealth, including retirement income planning, innovative healthcare solutions, alternative funded health plans, and specific actions individuals and business owners can take to gain control of their finances, have access to affordable quality health care, and achieve peace of mind. We'll also be joined by innovative experts who will share their knowledge and insights on prevalent topics. So, whether you're looking to grow your wealth or improve your health, you've come to the right place. Get ready to be informed, inspired, and empowered. Let's get started. Well, how about it, gang? It is time for another episode of the Health and Wealth Power Hour. It is great to have you with us today. My name is Harlan Pickett. I am your host. If this is the first time you ever listened to the Health and Wealth Power Hour, well, shame on you. Where have you been? But I'm telling you right now, you picked a great one to get started with. We are going to jump around and play kettlebell. What? Why would we possibly do that? Because it provides really good exercise. No, I didn't say extra fries. I know that's what you heard. Many of you out there heard extra fries. That's exactly the way my daughter actually pronounces exercise. So I'm not surprised about that at all. But we are blessed today to have Aleks with us. Aleks is a trainer, author, and two-time best-selling author on books about kettlebell, bodyweight training, and he also, get this, folks, is a bona fide foreign language geek. I am interested to learn more about that. Very cool stuff. Aleks, welcome aboard the Health and Wealth Power Hour, buddy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So when I first kind of got the invite to check out what you're doing, I said, kettlebell. What the heck is a kettlebell? I have to be honest. What is a kettlebell? Then I read kind of your story, and I'm like, that's kind of cool. So here's a little scrawny kid, and he'll tell you, I'm sure, the story, folks. Here's a little scrawny kid that could not figure out a way to bulk up. He tried everything in the world, and he got comments like, "So, is opening a door hard for you?" Which I think is just one of the funniest daggum things I've ever heard. But here he is working out with someone, and it's such a pitiful sight that they're asking you if opening a door is difficult for you. So talk a little bit about that young man's journey that you had.
Well, I want to start by saying I'm still friends with the guy who made that crack at my expense. And on many occasions, he has said, man, I don't think I've ever eaten my words harder than that. Or, some sort of a replication of that phrase. I look back at my childhood, and it's interesting because all of the stuff that we have now available at our fingertips was just very difficult to come by early on, if you even knew it existed. So, for instance, most Americans didn't know what a kettlebell was, even in 2008 when I discovered them and started training with them. It took years before the response was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." I mean, like they knew what it was. Before then, people were like, they couldn't even conceive of it. Like I would have to try to use my hands to like sort of show this globe sort of a shape, and then do the thing with the
handle,
the hand to show the handle. And it was like people just couldn't wrap their head around it. But I was always interested in physical activity as a youngster. I grew up and had a nice kind of woodsy creek area right to the side of my parents' house, and so I used to explore the creek very often. I did gymnastics as a kid, and I was very physical. I think I was sort of in the last part of the generation of millennials that played outside. As far as I know, it's like nowadays kids they're just glued to their screens, and
right.
I was part of the last generation where that was, or the at least tail end of the millennial generation where that wasn't necessarily the case. And but the one thing that was not so easy for me was basically any organized physical activity, or the kind of physical activity that you'd engage in with your peers. And so, like, I was usually picked, not necessarily last, but like pretty close to last in team sports through elementary, middle, and high school. I really like the mile run. I was never last, but I was like just lost in the middle. It was like the people who finished first and the people who finished last. Those are the people that everyone remembered. They're like, oh yeah, so and so is a stud. Ran the mile in 6 minutes and 30 seconds or whatever. And then there was a last person who was like 12 minutes. So I was always somewhere in between. I was just kind of like a face in the crowd. And,
Mhm.
I just didn't have a clue what to do about it. Because it was always my goal to be physically active, to be physically fit, to look good. Like I think everybody really wants that. And there are a lot of very funny a lot of very funny happenings along the way that sort of shaped who I ended up becoming. And just to give you an idea of the difference between then and now, one of my favorite stories is from high school. This is just maybe a year or two before is it hard for you to open doors incident. And so I was, we had weight training class in high school, and I believe this was my junior year because it was the last year that I had PE. And now the school I went to is Millard North High School in Omaha, Nebraska. And the year, maybe a year or two prior to my graduation, um, Eric Crouch, who was an alumnus of the school, won the Heisman Trophy. And suddenly, the school transformed. It was like there were so, I mean, understandably so. We were super proud.
Right.
And being a Nebraskan too, it's like it's not like New York where it's like you just got tons of famous people who come from there. So we're very proud of people like Warren Buffett, Eric Crouch, Connor Oberst, the musician, stuff like that. It's like, really a source of pride for us. And so um I think his image was emblazoned on the gym, on the weight room wall, all this other. His jersey was in the main thoroughfare. Like they put it in a case. It was a really big deal. So that's the background, okay? And I remember we were doing weight training. I had this really big, very scary gym teacher. Now he was always very cool to me. He wasn't like he wasn't scary to everybody, but he had high expectations of his athletes. I was not one of his athletes. I was a student, and so of course, he was very it was always very patient, and he was always very helpful to me. But if his athletes fell out of line, he wanted them to stay disciplined, and so I was paired for whatever reason with a football player who was like just a natural at everything, as far as I can tell. He was a grade younger than me, but he looked like he should have been in college. I mean, he was just like totally stacked. He was this like Nordic looking giant guy. And here I was, I was this like scrawny, I maybe weighed 125, 130 pounds or something like that. And we were benching, okay? And I don't know what he benched, but whatever it was, I'm sure he got quite a workout taking the weights off the bar to replace them with the smaller ones that I would be benching. And so I, lay down on the bench to bench the weight and lowered it to my chest, and that was it. I wasn't able to lift him back up. He evidently, and then I looked over at him. I remember looking over, and he was like talking with one of his friends over by the dumbbell rack. And I mean, I think in his mind, he was like, a 6-year-old girl with polio could probably bench this, so he's gonna be fine. And I was not fine.
Uh,
Also, not 6, didn't have polio. He just, he had higher expectations than me. So, I
that's
ended up.
great.
I was like, I was super embarrassed. So, like, like this this is really, not a good look for me. So I rolled, just very surreptitiously rolled the barbell down toward my hips, sat up, was able to do a sit up, and then I picked the weight up and I put it on the ground. And as I did that, Mr. Chavez shouted, "Aaron!" That was just my spotter's name, and the entire weight room froze and just looked over at us. And he's like, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be spotting him." And Aaron's face turned about as red as your shirt. I had never seen anything like it. And then he mumbled something under his breath. I'm sure there were swear words that I can't repeat here. And even though he was embarrassed because all eyes were on him and he had just gotten shouted at by our massive, terrifying gym teacher who could bench 350 for reps as though it was no big deal, I was the one who felt the most humiliated because
Right.
I'm sure everybody saw that he was able to curl the weight and put it back on the bar. I don't even know if he used both hands to curl it, to be quite honest with you. So that was essentially where I started from. It was not, not very high. And I did find that kind of toward the end of my foray into PE in high school that I did have certain talents or certain things that did come naturally to me. I remember, for instance, we had this game that was, as far as I know, was made up for our school called mat ball. It was like baseball, only it was you could have more than one person congregated on a base because there's like there's one of these big, fold out mats, and you would never really run home. You just tried to stay as long as you could on the bases. A number of other rules that I don't really recall, but for whatever reason, I was decently good at that. Completely irrelevant because outside the school, nobody'd ever heard of it. I have to explain it here, so Um, and then
Uh,
badminton, of all things. Okay, now
okay.
now think of this. I was 17, as I just said, I or 16 actually. And the internet existed, but it wasn't like the ubiquitous thing that it is now, where everyone's just like, well, we'll just check it out on the internet, or I'll just explore the world. It was not like that. And so I just figured badminton was yet another gym class sport. I had no idea that it was an Olympic sport. And here I was, 16 years old. I mean, I could smoke two people at the same time on badminton, anybody in the class. I have no idea why I was good at it. I and it, had I known that it was actually an Olympic sport, I might have begged my parents for lessons. And you might now be talking to an Olympic medalist of some sort. Maybe not gold, but like at least bronze. And well, but those days have passed me by because that was 20 years ago. But suffice it to say, that was kind of my origin story, as it was. So it was not quite. It was like the reverse of Superman. He had these preternatural powers and abilities. From birth. After he was found in this alien spaceship, and for me, it was like had a completely normal birth. There was nothing abnormal about anything. Same thing with my upbringing, except for I was like crappier than most people. So it wasn't until I found something that really resonated with me in terms of like physical activity that things started to change. And of all things, it was martial arts. A friend of mine and I got really into martial art called Muay Thai, which is very common. If you watch like mixed martial arts, you'll see a lot of people when they're standing up and they're striking. A lot of times they'll use movements from Muay Thai. So, punching and kicking, but there's also knees and elbows and stuff like that. You know, pretty nasty stuff to get hit by, but it was a lot of fun because we weren't taking elbows and knees to the face in class,
Right.
probably because it's not a good business model to, let 19-year-olds get completely annihilated by, guys who are 250 pounds or whatever. Um, but it was a lot of fun and I really enjoyed it. And along the way, I was very fortunate to have made friends with somebody that I had gone to middle and high school with, but we really didn't get along. I don't remember why. I think he was kind of friends with some people who I just found goofy, and like identity and who you associate with is everything in high school. And so, and I do remember too that he
Absolutely.
he even though he didn't do Muay Thai, he did knee me in a place that you're not really supposed to knee people for some reason in high school, or it was probably middle school actually. I don't think it was high school, but nevertheless, that it stuck with me. But by college, you're out of the public school system essentially. Now you're paying for stuff, and your mindset changes a little bit. And so he and I happened to have a university class together with Spanish, and yeah, I guess at this point, bygones were bygones. We recognized each other from our public school days, and we started hanging out. And he was really getting into strength training, which previously hadn't really interested me. I was doing weight training in the form of bodybuilding, which is, it does involve resistance training, but the goal of bodybuilding is not so much to lift as much weight as possible, but rather to make yourself more aesthetically pleasing, using whatever weights are going to help you to achieve that. So I was open up to a whole new world, and I was really intrigued because he was talking left and right about this thing called kettlebell. And I had heard of kettlebells because I'd read a book about Bruce Lee's training called Bruce Lee, The Art of Expressing the Human Body by John Little. Very good book. He, again, pre internet, somehow managed to put together this incredible collection of Bruce Lee's training philosophies and training approaches. And I remember a very oblique reference, no pictures, no anything, just a written description of something called a kettlebell that Bruce Lee had trained with already in the 1960s. Bruce Lee was very ahead of his time. Now, he wasn't using a kettlebell like what most people would be familiar with, which is a big iron ball. Kind of looks like a cannonball with like a suitcase handle, essentially. Like a very cheap suitcase handle, not like leather and, chained and all the nice stuff. It's just a big solid iron handle. And but there was an add-on that there was a company in the United States that used to make, so you could put one of those handles on a dumbbell, and you could do some of the things that you would do with a Russian kettlebell, like you would have gotten in the then Soviet Union. And kettlebell long predated the Soviet Union, and as a matter of fact, it was they were even popular in America and throughout Europe prior to like the 1940s or 50s. But once machines and health clubs started becoming more popular, a lot of the older school approaches to strength training started to fall away, and kettlebells became doorstops, and everyone sort of forgot about them. I won't go into the whole story about how they got reintroduced to the United States, but long story short, one day I, this had to have been late March or early April of 2008. So we're going on 16 years now. My sweet 16 this year of lifting kettlebells. Drew called me because this is before people texted exclusively and were like terrified of answering the phone.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Hey, what are you doing right now?" And I was in college, so I was not going to say I'm doing homework, which is really the correct answer, but it wasn't what I was doing. And he said, "Why don't you come over and we'll try a kettlebell workout?" And previously, I was intrigued by the kettlebell, but I wasn't like really interested. But for whatever reason, I said yes. So I went over. He showed me how to do all this kettlebell stuff, and I was hooked because it was like nothing I'd ever experienced, but it made sense because it was like I'm not sitting on a bench and curling some weights, which is, it has its value. It's certainly not a waste of time. Um, but I was using my hips, and I was lifting heavier weights with a kettlebell than I was with, the dumbbells, and I was doing these things with it that like made it feel like it weighed even less. So I felt like I had this surge of power that I didn't even know that I had in me. And then, of course, he did like the ultimate thing, and he loaned me a kettlebell and two books by Pavel Tsatsouline, who is the guy who's responsible for essentially reintroducing the kettlebell into the U.S. He's a former Soviet Spetsnaz or Special Forces personal training instructor who moved to the United States in, I think, the early to mid 90s. And by the early 2000s, he was writing about kettlebell training. Previously, he thought no one would care, no one would want to know because it's, particularly challenging and kind of oddball workout. But he was goaded into it by a guy named Marty Gallagher, who used to write for the Washington Post on fitness and health and stuff like that, and was also the coach of the U.S. powerlifting team and various very successful powerlifters. And everything just sort of took off from there. So my education got started. Really, it was like not even a 101 course. It was like a 201 or a 301 because I was being thrust right into the middle of this, really incredible kettlebell education. And in your early 20s, you have all sorts of energy and time, and because you're not studying, even though you're supposed to be. And so I jumped in
Yep.
feet first, and that was when a lot of really cool stuff started happening. And it's sort of a long answer to a short question as far as how I got to where I am now. But suffice it to say, um, I it really did change my life, and I've since gone on to become an instructor. And kind of a cool and surreal experience that I had recently was that in December, I've written a number of articles for a website called StrongFirst, which is the website. It's the organization of Pavel, the guy who brought kettlebells
Okay.
into the U.S. and into the Western world in general. And uh, side but right next, so it was be a few days later, an article was posted written by him. So there was an article written by me and an article written by him on the number one kettlebell website in the world. And I just can't help but think I went from being picked almost last, made fun of by even my really good friends about how weak I was, and now I've got articles appearing next to Pavel's articles, and the world's number one website for strength training
Okay,
education.
training. Yeah.
And all I can think is, what a long, strange trip it's been.
So you went from that place where you were made fun of, and I love how you say you had the barbell with two bagels on the end of it,
Yeah.
uh, trying to
Yeah.
choke you out, right? That you
Yeah.
ended up having to roll off yourself to now being known as the Hebrew Hammer. I
It's
love
my
it.
my superhero name. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, what does it really mean then? You talked about strong fist, but you're considered a level two
Mhm.
strong fist certified kettlebell instructor. What does that really put that into perspective of something that someone could kind of relate it to?
This will sound a little avant-garde perhaps, but I think that would be one of the things that is really perhaps only interesting to other instructors or fitness
Okay.
coaches. Um, and so it's a great question, but the question I always try to get people, especially my colleagues, to understand is that when it comes to the people like my own students and my clients and the people who follow me or who get my courses and programs and stuff like that, they're not so much thinking like, okay, what is this guy's qualifications? They're mostly concerned with how can he help me, And so,
True.
I could completely abdicate that throne of being a level two and just go back to being a level one, and I wouldn't lose any business as a result. What it does mean, though, is that there are certain kettlebell skills that I don't think most people will really ever need to worry about learning, but that are interesting to instructors and people like me who want to get a deeper and wider knowledge. So what it means is that I'm capable of, I've demonstrated proficiency in advanced kettlebell exercises that require a lot more conditioning or a lot more coordination and strength, that I've passed certain physical tests, and that I've also demonstrated my own teaching abilities. So, on the industry side of things, let's say it's an impressive certification. But for most people who are more interested in, like, how can this guy help me? How can he understand where I'm coming from and the kind of goals that I want to accomplish? I would say the importance is more secondary in that I have I would say a deeper knowledge and understanding of um, movement and strength and things of that nature. But the exact exercises that I had to demonstrate or that I had to perform, a little bit less important. They've been important to me in the sense that I've helped other people prepare for such certifications, but it's a minority of the people who reach out to me for help with their own fitness needs.
Okay. So, I asked that question because I was curious if it was just related to kettlebell, because I know you've kind of, I would say branched out, but it probably really, I look at it that way, but in your world, it probably isn't branching out whenever you're also working with natural human movement and some of the other things. But so you didn't just stay focused just in that. There's other things that you're doing in your training as well. So touch on that a little bit as well.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, I was always interested in calisthenics training, for instance, or body weight training. Calisthenics is just kind of like another word for just movements with your body weight only. So if you think about like push-ups, pull-ups,
Right.
things like that, I was always interested. But I never really pursued it all that seriously because the first couple of years that I was lifting kettlebells, I would say maybe the first 2 years specifically, I was much more focused on the kettlebell in particular. But I did have a very interesting experience that helped me to realize the importance of branching out. And you're going to laugh. And I'm not going to tell you not to laugh because this is a funny story. This is a funny realization or funny way to have come to this realization. Um, you know, poor college student, I had a part-time job at like a fast food restaurant, and the other part of the time I was studying. Well, I was saving up money to take a semester off and go to Israel for 5 months so that I could perfect my Hebrew in an intense foreign language course. And it's called an ulpan in Hebrew, which just means studio, but it's kind of just describing the location of where these classrooms are. It's just kind of a studio classroom. You'll have a teacher who just helps. Normally, it's immigrants like to learn the language very quickly, but I'm a nerd, and I figured if I couldn't be good at sports and physical activity as a youth, I should at least be good at intellectual activities. And so, one of my hobbies starting in college really was to learn Hebrew. And growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, there are really only so many opportunities to use the language. So I
That's
was,
shocking.
imagine that. Obviously, it's very different now because you've got all these services and stuff like that where you can connect with people all
Right.
over the place. But in
Right.
'04, it was not like that. So um, being a nerd, I took a semester off of school to do a semester of something completely different elsewhere. And so part of the day when I did it, it was about 4 hours of classroom time and then 4 hours of work. And this is a funny part, just a side note, but I worked in what's called a refit, which in Hebrew is basically like a dairy farm or like a cow shed, they would call it.
Okay.
And I could have driven like half an hour in any direction from Omaha and gotten the exact same job. And instead, I went all the way to the Middle East to, to get pooped on by cows and milk them and all that other stuff. So it was kind of like it was a particular program that's designed to be like, it gives you a sense of, uh, what it's like to live there. You work half the day on, something that's relevant to the location where you're living. In this case, it was a kibbutz. And a kibbutz is just kind of like a collective living, uh, uh, I would say a commune, even though it has sort of a bad reputation. It's not a commune in the sense of like the hippie sort of stuff. But at any rate, so in order to pay for it, because it was a paid program, uh, I was like, I need to make more money, and I'm getting paid like $8.50 an hour at a fast food restaurant. Not bad, certainly better than what a lot of people were getting paid. But I decided to do a medical testing study, and these can go one of two ways. And now I was doing one where the payout was like $1,000, which means it's a pretty safe medical testing study. There are others that pay out quite a bit more because you're taking on a lot more risk. And really, like if they pay you 7 grand for something, like your complications could cost a lot more than 7 grand. So like the thousand
Yeah,
dollars
yeah.
that I made for the weekend was, no big deal really. Um but I remember I asked them, I was like, hey, can I bring a kettlebell in to pass the time while I'm there? And they were like, no. I'm sure that was the first time anybody ever asked, can I bring in a piece of exercise equipment? They were adamant that the answer was no. So I remember just sitting there like a shiftless layabout for, it was like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I was like, God, I want to move, I want to lift something. I want to, be physically active. And I really didn't have any options. And the whole purpose was that uh, they were testing out a new use for a drug that uh, it had already been approved by the FDA. And so they just needed to do tests over the course of a couple of days just to, check I guess, the relevant measures to make sure that it could be used for the second use. So there's no leaving the place. You're stuck there. And it was then that I realized, you know what, it would make sense to have some other skills outside of kettlebell training so that at a minimum, if I want to get in a brief workout, I wouldn't even need a kettlebell. And this revelation was like early 2009, and it wasn't until really 2011 that I started getting interested in calisthenics training or bodyweight training. And but the seed had been planted, and so I was well aware of its importance. But by the beginning of 2010, so I went in July, I went to Israel, and I was there until early January of 2010. Came back, finished my degree in English with a focus on writing and linguistics. And along the way, before I finished it by the end of 2010, I had signed up for Pavel's kettlebell certification. And so I became a certified kettlebell instructor before I even got my bachelor's degree. But so all that to say, yeah, eventually I learned that, one of the things that makes the kettlebell powerful is that it works with the natural movements of your body. And so you have to know how to move your body naturally in a variety of different ways in order to really be able to get the most out of kettlebell training. And I think the same can be said about barbell training, honestly, or machine training. Your body moves and this is speaking very broadly, but in terms of strength training, it moves in very broad patterns. So we might say like a pushing pattern, as an example, could be something like a push up. It could be a dip, like on parallel bars. It could be what's called a military press or an overhead press. We lift something over your head. Real world example might be get on a plane and you got to, put your luggage in the overhead compartment. That like those kind of movements, they fall on this sort of spectrum that we would refer to as a pressing movement, which is just pushing something away from you with the upper body. And this is just one example. There are lots of them. And so suffice it to say, your body's made to do a lot of different things, and it is able to do certain things. And so you're able to lift kettlebells, but you're made to move through free space, interact with the environment around you. And I started to see for myself, and particularly as I started taking on clients, that it was important to have a wider, let's say, understanding of how all that works. And so this was sort of like the beginning of those things, and later became a very important part of what I teach my own students and clients now. And I'm always the guinea pig first. So I test it out on myself before I foist it upon anybody else.
So when you went down this pathway, then you kind of expanded your repertoire, as it were, realizing that you needed to do some other things. Did that then have an impact on, I know that you went to some other countries and did some training there.
Mhm.
Did that allow that to happen because you had kind of expanded what you were doing? Did that open up some doors for you, or was it strictly still the kettlebell that you still were kind of leaning on to make those journeys?
Believe it or not, um, I've been to some countries to attend certifications and workshops and things like that, and then I've been to a number of others where my task was to either assist or lead workshops. And I would say, really, it was, for instance, a body weight training, as well as teaching about just natural basic human movements, like what we teach in, there's an organization I'm affiliated with and an instructor through called Original Strength, which is the very foundational movements that everybody can do to improve their health and fitness like really, really fast. And it was really more those things that opened up doors for me, because I certainly taught a lot about kettlebells, but um, so many other people had begun doing that early on, and there was really not a lot of good information about movement and body weight training. There's more now, for sure, but more than anything, even now, in my honest opinion, I think when it comes to body weight training, like push-ups and pull-ups and things of this nature, um, it's either one of two extremes. One of them is that it's treated like some sort of a high rep, conditioning drill that people do in group fitness classes, and there's not really much of a focus on uh, doing it to get good at the movement and you have that build up strength in other areas. And then the other one is that it's done by, like the street workout types that you see, and doing all these flips and crazy things on, like, public
Right.
pull-up bars and stuff like that. There's not a lot of in between, and so people were very interested in the in between. And I happen to have done a lot to, again, I was a total dweeb growing up, and so I had to like reverse engineer how to do stuff like one arm push-ups and pistol squats, or what single leg squats, and things of that nature. And people were very interested in learning how to do the same thing from somebody who was not some natural super stud, Superman who came out of a special space pod and, was just automatically super strong and stuff like that, but somebody who actually had to learn it. And so I think my process of reverse engineering those things so that I could figure them out uh, opened up a lot of doors for me, because others wanted to figure out what that process was, and I had the ability to simply show them. So that was what opened the biggest doors, I would say.
So I'm going to ask a maybe a strange question here.
Ask away.
So how tall are you?
About 5'8".
Okay. So in this journey that you've had, as you've worked with other folks with kettlebell, have you noticed it being more difficult for taller individuals to maybe reach the goals? And I ask that question because I had some of the same issues that you did whenever I was growing. I'm about 6'3", but I have a little bit longer arms and so longer muscles, and it's a weird thing, right? I'd see these shorter guys doing these reps, and it's like they bulked up like crazy, and I'm like, I did 50 reps and I ain't got nothing going on. I mean, it was eh, so I stayed very light. In fact, it was very frustrating to my football coach that I was not gaining the weight that he wanted me to gain, although I was able to do some of the things that he wanted me to do as far as physically. I still wasn't gaining the weight, say some of the other people. We did. Everyone on the team wasn't over 6 foot tall back then. I don't know what's happened to the world where everyone's all of a sudden giants. But when I played, I was one of the tallest people by far on my team. And these other guys seemed to be able to bulk up with no problem, but it didn't work for me at all.
Yeah, no, you've touched on a very important topic, actually, and that's it. What I would say is, if we were to take like an eagle's eye view of it, it's the importance of individualization for your training. Now, it's not to say that everybody needs like a super individualized program, because there are certainly templates and approaches that work for a lot of different people, but people will certainly take to some exercises better than others. And a lot of it just depends on, like what you mentioned, like how long your limbs are, how tall you are. And so I would say, the same movements are still valuable because the body is made to move in certain ways. But if you have, let's say, shorter arms, well, you're going to be able to lift a ton. I'll give you a great example. I have a friend, and it doesn't mean you can't lift a decent amount with longer arms, but it does mean that you're going to have well, a longer way to press the weight. Let's use like a bench press as an example, just because everyone's
Hmm.
familiar with it. I have a friend he's now a physical therapist in Texas, but he grew up in a small town in Nebraska called Utan, and he was a really high level power lifter. Like when he was, I think this was 2006, he was top in the world in his weight class and in the particular federation that he lifted in. I think he weighed about 132 pounds, I think, for his competition, and he deadlifted, meaning lifted off the floor, 505 pounds, squatted the same amount, and he benched like 305 pounds. But what was interesting is that now, number one, he's short. He's maybe 5'3", 5'4", something like that, but he's got really long arms. So if people with long arms, deadlift is usually a good option for them because the weight doesn't have to move as far. But bench press, not so good because the weight has to move a lot farther. He told me once that he lifted with a midget um, who could bench like 500 pounds. And, you think about it, like, oh, that makes sense because the guy's moving the weight like, 6
Three
inches.
inches, right?
Yeah, and if you know some of the techniques for powerlifting, I'm not sure this guy was able to get his arms super wide, but you can take a wider grip, and that also shortens the distance that the bar has to travel. And so, but he had a huge advantage in that regard because he was the weight didn't have a long distance to travel. So the overall thing for people to take from that observation is that yeah, sometimes you're going to find that strength training and even specific movements that your body is made to do might just take you a little bit longer to see the results versus somebody who is, let's say, 4'11" and only has to move a weight like a very small distance. But similarly, somebody of your height. Well, first of all, you're probably a lot more popular with the ladies back in high school because like women love tall guys. For me, I've got to have a great personality. 5'8", I gotta yeah, I gotta work
Uh,
a little bit harder on those other attributes. Um, but yeah, there's no question that being taller is going to help you with certain things, whether it's basketball, there's just an obvious advantage there.
right.
Having longer limbs, similarly, if you have long legs, you're probably going to be a better distance runner because you don't have to take as many steps.
I
Uh,
was.
yeah, yeah, see, there you go. There you go. Long arms, great for boxing, martial arts in general, because you keep somebody far away from you. You can hit them from one town over. But some of the times, yeah, it's going to certainly make your improvement in certain strength training movements a little bit. It's going to just take longer in order to get better or to get to certain
To
levels of it.
get
Whereas
those
somebody with
results
short
to
arms,
get, yeah. Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Okay.
And so, yeah, sometimes I would say people who are taller have to train slightly differently because they have to keep those things in mind. But by all means, I would say results are still within your reach to get them. You just have to take a slightly different path than somebody who's shorter and thus has a really brief path.
So, what about age? And I want to go at this from a couple of different directions. I happened to talk to a gentleman. He's in his 20s, so he's a gentleman now. I still want to call him a kid, right? But he's not. But he was introduced to, in particular, bodybuilding when he was 16, and his results of that were that yes, he was able to accomplish some really cool things in his building, but he also suffered a number of injuries that will go with him for the rest of his life because
Mm.
unfortunately he wasn't taught probably properly, I guess is the best way to say, how to handle certain things.
Yeah.
So give me your thoughts on that. But on the other side, what age have you seen people start this, say later in life, and still have really good results?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, first of all, I'll mention the bodybuilder chap. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that teenagers and people in their early 20s need to put a real emphasis on is finding a good mentor for those things because when you're at those ages, if everything else is working the way that it's supposed to be, you probably got a ton of testosterone, you've got a ton of potential to do a lot of work and recover very quickly. And lately, there's also been an impetus for, and I think it's a dangerous one, for young people to want to do steroids or performance enhancing drugs to just maximize their muscle growth. But if you're going to train for health, you're going to train for fitness, you're going to train for longevity, by all means, you should stay away from those things. And I think that young people very often don't understand the kind of impact that they're going to have on themselves, such as, for instance, if they take steroids or, try to increase their testosterone using a variety of, we'll say, medical methods, it can really negatively impact their endocrine system and all sorts of other things. So you want to avoid those things. So that's number one. You want to find a competent and capable mentor. But number two, it's also very important, like you said, is you don't want to get injured, because those are things that, even if for a while they don't seem like they're going to cause a problem, it's probably going to end up being an issue later in life. I've had minor injuries that I still have to contend with periodically. I've been very fortunate because most of my injuries have been pretty minor, but yeah, so that would be number one. If you have young kids, by all means, I think that you should encourage them, particularly teenage boys, girls too, but boys I think are more drawn to these sorts of things. Um, to learn how to strength train properly, but to get good instruction and to have a long-term focus. They're probably not going to be sports superstars, just statistically speaking. So keeping them away from stuff
Right.
like steroids and stuff like and other performance enhancing drugs, unless they're actually competing and they want to deal with the ramifications of having gotten caught in some sort of a league that tests them. Avoid it. But for older people, um, as long as your heart's still beating and you are able to move and uh, you're able to make your own decisions and you're able to be physically independent, you can keep making gains. There's no question about it. Now, you asked about, some of the like older people that I maybe have trained, or people like at what age I've started training people. And I'll give you a couple of stories. There was one lady I started training. I'm going to give a fake name because I don't know, I haven't been in touch with her for a little while. But back when I was training her, because of the nature of her job, it couldn't be seen as though she was giving any sort of preferential treatment or endorsement to anybody. She was the manager of a local TV station, but also managed several other TV stations throughout the U.S. Uh, High-powered executive, super high-stress job, not a lot of sleep. I mean, these are all, ate like crap. These are all the sorts of things that generally are looked at as like a cocktail for like not getting very great fitness results. Um, but when I started working with her, I basically only saw her twice a week. It was Tuesday and Thursday for about an hour. And anything she did between those times. So I had her for 2 hours a week, 166 hours of the remainder of the week, she was on her own. So I would try to give her, here are some things to do about your eating. I had her keep a food journal, and then we really focused on like, look, don't worry about eating perfectly, but let's try to make sure that most of the time you're eating reasonably well. And then, you have some times during the week or weekend where you cut loose a little bit, no problem. And so I kept an eye on that. And then when she trained, we primarily focused on strength, and I built her up from, smaller wins to progressively larger wins. And the biggest thing that I was just very proud of her for accomplishing, I'll take credit for it having been under my tutelage, of course, but she put in the work, was that at 50 years old, despite having never done them before in the past, she worked up to her first unassisted chin-ups. So here we've got a lady who's, not getting 8 nice, easy hours of sleep every night, had a really super stressful job. She had an ex-husband who, according to her, I didn't get his side of the story, so I'm not going to try to talk total trash,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but he was dragging her through the mud in court case and just constant headache for her. Remarried and was trying to, make the most of that marriage, also trying to co-parent kids with a very insubordinate ex-husband. So really, again, not great uh, uh, ground for making gains, but because I'm very fortunate that I had the education that I did, and not only in kind of reverse engineering things for myself, but also getting outside education and strength training, and particularly in kettlebells and that sort of a thing. I was able to help her get to her first chin-ups, and again, at the age of 50. And it wasn't a fluke, as it turns out, because I trained another gal. This is during the time that I lived in Israel. This was later after the kibbutz period. 57-year-old grandma, similarly, always wanted to to, you know, lift heavy and do cool stuff and do chin-ups. And she had tried for ages. She had followed other protocols and just never had any luck. And so I did a session with her. I gave her a program. I said, just do this, and kind of like take 2 months and call me in the morning, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think it was within a couple of weeks, she got her first unassisted chin ups. Again, she was 56 or 57 at the time. Um, but maybe the story that I'm most proud of is there was a lady named Sue that I trained, and she was 75 years old. She was a candidate for a double knee replacement surgery, and she was already planning on getting her knees replaced. And her physical therapist, who was a colleague of mine, Dara, said, "Okay, look, don't sign up for the knee replacements just yet, particularly because it can usually go one of two ways. It's either the best thing you've ever done, or you're crippled for the rest of your life, especially at your age. So you got a couple years left. You might as well enjoy them. So why don't you do everything you can to try to avoid this surgery, because it's going to be really invasive. Uh, Train with Aleks for a few months, and if it doesn't work out, and you do everything he says, but it doesn't work out, then by all means get the knee surgery." So I started training with her, and I would see her like twice a week, and then everything that we did, it was not, like some of the stuff I might do with like some young buck who wants to lift heavy and what
Sure,
have you. I primarily focused on the movements that I mentioned from the organization that I'm affiliated with, Original Strength. And so this was stuff like learning how to breathe properly, learning pardon me, how to move your head and neck, which are very essential movements. We don't think about them a lot, but it's the essence really of a lot of athletic upper body movement. Is your body's going to follow your head. And then rolling, rocking, and crawling on the ground. These are the movements that you've seen your kids do. This is what they do as babies and toddlers. That helps to create the strength and the movement capacity to be able to walk upright and then do more complex things later. Well, our bodies basically have this map of movement that if we go back and we kind of refresh the foundation that all of the rest of our movement is built on, primarily with those foundational movements of deep breathing, head control, rolling, rocking, and then gait pattern or walking pattern movements like crawling, and on 2 feet, stuff like marching, things like this. It can really work wonders. I mean, I do this stuff like every day. I do it with all my clients. But what was especially cool with her was that within 7 months of working with her, she went from having like debilitating knee pain that sort of kept her from even being able to walk down to the opposite end of the street without some pretty nasty knee pain, to being able to walk 10,000 steps a day for 8 days in a row on a vacation to Spain, and
wow,
no knee pain at all. Now,
wow,
no, make no mistake, she still had no cartilage in her knees. The physical damage was still there, but the difference was that she had built up enough strength and movement capacity where she was able to overcome those things. And once she was able to do that, we worked on other stuff like being able to sit up with no hand assistance from like a really deep chair, get up and down off the ground with no external assistance, walk up a flight of stairs without having to grab onto a railing. So in some ways, I would say that it was probably the biggest success story that I had of any of my students, and I've helped people.
that's amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
that's wow.
people forget just how much those little things matter.
Yeah,
And as you start to see your older loved ones, slow down and not really be able to do the things that they could do anymore, quite often, I can't say always, but quite often it's possible to restore those abilities, but it's just a matter of having a process for doing it. And so I
right.
was very fortunate for the time that I spent. I lived in Israel for about 4.5 years, and I worked with a lot of people who came to me specifically from their physical therapist. It was either Dara or another guy that I worked with, Stephen, who was an immigrant from England. They would send people to me, and so my job was essentially to get them to move in a way that they weren't going to be like 1 foot in the PT's door and 1 foot out of his or her office. And so I was later able to use that knowledge to put into the training courses and programs and challenges that I have now, that combine kettlebell and bodyweight movements with these other natural, wholesome movements that allow people to move normally and with resilience and confidence. And that was, I think, one of the things that was the biggest help for me, because now I've got people who are, yeah, I would say mostly in their 40s and 50s, but periodically I have people in their 60s, even in their 70s, who will reach out and let me know that, one of the courses of mine or one of the programs of mine was, instrumental in them being able to accomplish things they never thought possible.
Well, that is very cool. So talk about you've got two books out there. Talk a
Yes,
little bit
sir.
about those books and kind of what inspired you to write them to begin with.
Mm. Well, the first one that I wrote is called the No BS Kettlebell and Bodyweight Kickstart. And the big thing that inspired me to want to write it was that there was a lot of information about kettlebell training, for advanced, for intermediate, for beginners. There's a decent amount now about bodyweight training, but there was really not a whole lot of quality information about how to combine these. And then, of course, I also added the third, what I view as like the third element, which is the natural human movement side of things, into one system that people can use for a wide variety of goals. So it's usually one thing or the other. And I see those things as being kind of interconnected and being a part of like an ecosystem that can help people to get stronger, fitter, and healthier in a very short amount of time with minimal equipment and just using natural movements that the body is designed to be able to do. So the idea with the kickstart was to get people quite literally kickstarted you in the simplest and most direct way possible with kettlebells, body weight, and movement, and then also to give them a routine that wasn't going to be really daunting. A lot of times I see books where it's like, here's a 12-week program, and committing to something for 12 weeks, everybody can do it, but psychologically I think a lot of people think, gosh, 12 weeks, that's a long time. Or maybe they get 3 or 4 weeks in and they miss a couple of days because their kid got sick or they had to travel for work. And then they think, I screwed it all up. I'm going to quit. So I only wrote it, I wrote a routine in there that's only 2 weeks and it can be repeated as you wish. So it's basically a 2 week kickstart to get you off on the right foot. And then if you decide, you can go on to any other program that you want to, knowing that you've got at least a decent foundation and that from there you can start to learn and build new skills. Or if you like what you're doing, you can just repeat the cycle within the book and do that until you find that you want to start working on something else. But more than anything, I realized that again, people need um, more than one option for their training. And again, I love kettlebells. I like body weight training. The people who follow me have a tendency to like those things as well. Same with training at home. Again, most people don't want to drive 20 or 30 minutes to a crowded gym that's, maybe filled with people who are big and intimidating, throwing around these big weights, and then they have to wait on the equipment that they want, and they got to ask that big huge guy with the tattoos, and they're not sure if he's going to be cool or if he's a total jerk, how many sets that he has left, or if they can work in. And so um, I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that that's what fitness is that you've got to go drive somewhere to to get fit. And I've trained in gyms before. It's a lot of fun, but it's not a necessity. And so I wanted to show people how they could get in the best shape of their life at home with a good system, using a mixture of tools as opposed to trying to over rely on just one. And then also giving them an excuse to do something for the short term, just to show themselves that they can do something and they can finish it. Because whether it's 2 weeks or 2 months, you're going to feel a lot better about your fitness program if you've actually finished it. A lot of times people start things and they don't finish, and it doesn't matter how much distance they've covered in that time or how much fitter they've gotten. There's sort of the sense that you didn't really do what you were supposed to do because you didn't
Right.
finish. So on the psychological side, that was it's all like it's all wrapped up in that book to get people doing something where they can get an early win on the board. Where if nothing else, they can say, "Well, I did it. I did the 2 weeks worth of training. I feel great. Maybe I'll do it again. Maybe I'll do it a couple more times, and then maybe I'll move on to the next thing." So whether that ends up being one of my programs or one of my colleagues' programs, if they've gotten started, they've gotten a huge step ahead of those who want to get started but don't really know exactly what to do. So I basically, you know, uh, showed them the best and fastest path to do that, but I believe to be the best and fastest path, and one that they're going to have a ton of fun doing as well.
Yeah, because that first step is the hardest, right? Doesn't there's never any other steps until you take that first one, and that first one is always the hardest.
Exactly, and you can only take them one at a time. That's the other
Yeah.
thing is I think people. I don't want to blame the fitness industry in particular. It's very popular among my colleagues to talk trash about the fitness industry, but the reality is that some of it, I think, comes from other people's sort of delusional desires, and people love, this psyched up, like, oh yeah, I'll give it 110%. I'm gonna leave it all in the gym. I'm gonna go hard, or I'm gonna go home. The reality is that, like, you're going to be alive probably for a really long time. And how much of that time do you want to spend sore and feeling borderline crippled because you did way more work than you should have? You did 110%, a bunch of times, and then you had to take 3 months off because you tweaked something. So, another message that I try to get people to understand is that it's there's a famous saying, I believe it's from Don Quixote. It's not the road, or sorry, it's not the inn, it's the road. Meaning it's
Right.
not the destination, it's the
So,
road along the way that
yeah.
you need to be focused on. And so it's the consistency over intensity that I try to get people to focus on. So it's not as anxiety inducing, and it's something they actually look forward to.
So what is the second book about?
Okay, the second book is a lot nerdier in a certain sense because it's really only going to interest people who are already all bought in. So you're like, let's say you started lifting kettlebells and you're like, I love it. This is great. I'm making great progress, but I'm feeling like, I've hit a certain plateau and I'm not getting any farther. So I wrote a book with a title that kettlebell people will listen to, and they'll be like, that's pretty funny. If you're not a kettlebell person, I'll explain why people would have that reaction. And it's called Tamers of the Lost Ark. And I don't know if you've seen it, but I'm going to just show you the cover because I think you'll get a kick out of it. Your viewers aren't going to be able to see it, or your listeners aren't going to be able to see it, but it's basically, you see that big huge kettlebell in the background right there. How about that?
Yes, I do. Yeah,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
and he's got a kettlebell as well, a
It's
gold one.
a golden one, exactly, similar
Yes.
to what a certain action hero might have gotten while he was being chased by a giant ball. Um, so, so the idea behind it is that one of the standout features of kettlebell training is what's called the ballistic exercises, and a ballistic lift is basically a movement that is done what we would call maybe with bad technique and most other movements, because it's done with a lot of speed momentum. Like if
Okay.
you see somebody in a gym or something like that lifting like really fast, their trainer might say, whoa, slow down. Like you don't want to use the momentum because you're not going to get as much out of it. But there's a whole different class of exercises in kettlebell training where you do get a lot out of the momentum. It's the way that the movements are designed, that it's the momentum that is the standout feature, and they're called ballistic lifts. So stuff like if you've ever seen anybody swinging a kettlebell, like it looks like they're
Yeah.
kind of
Okay.
squatting down, and then
Okay.
so that would be one example. And then there are a couple of other ones. One of them is called the clean, which is kind of the same thing, but the bell is kept a little closer to the body, and it ends up in what's called the rack position, which is kind of just held by your chest. And then there's high pull, where you're just kind of pulling it up sort of toward your face, and it's a little bit off to the side. And there's another one, everybody loves this one. It's called the snatch, where snatch it overhead, and it's at arm's length over your head, but it's done in one smooth and explosive movement.
Hmm.
Well, so these are called ballistics, and uh, the path that the kettlebell follows in all these movements is called the arc. So the arc is just, again, it's just describing the pathway of the movement, and it's a little bit different for each movement because you have to control that path. What's called taming the arc, a little bit differently for each movement. So the issue that a lot of kettlebell people find is maybe not so much instructors, because it's kind of their profession, and so they drill the movements enough until it becomes second nature. But for enthusiasts, the difficult part is that you really can't think your way through a ballistic lift, and that's one of the rules that you were taught. If you were a geek like me and you decide that you want to go and get certified and everything like that, you get taught, okay, well, when you're teaching somebody, don't try to shout a bunch of cues at them to try to get them to lift correctly while they're doing the exercise. You need to do that before, because they're not going to be able to think their way through it. But unfortunately, most instructors just fall back into that category of shouting instructions at them while they're moving. It's like it's not helpful. So what I did was I put together some specialized drills to help make it easier to tame the arc, which for a lot of people is very hard for them to find. And I just gave it an amusing name, and the theme running throughout the book is taming that lost arc. So I called it Tamers of the Lost Ark, and it was a lot of fun to write. I've had a lot of people tell me how much they've enjoyed reading it, but it's more of like if you're an intermediate. So I would say
Okay. Yeah.
brand new, the better thing, of course, would be to get get the No BS kettlebell and bodyweight kickstart. And then once you've gone down full blown geek mode in the kettlebell world, Tamers of the Lost Ark will be a lot of fun for you.
So we talked about this a little before we started started the podcast.
Mhm.
Is a great place for someone to get more information and maybe even start a little bit of this themselves. 9-minute challenge. Is that the kind of the
Absolutely.
first place they would go? So that's 9minutechallenge.com, folks. The number 9minutechallenge.com. Tell folks what kind of they'll find there and what is the 9-minute challenge.
So the 9-minute challenge was a challenge that I put together based around some of the movements that are going to allow you to recruit the most muscle, use the most natural movements of your body, such as I mentioned earlier, your gait pattern or your walking pattern. You know, a lot of times people think, okay, so for exercises, what should I do for this muscle or for that muscle? But the reality is that you've got one body, and every muscle is somehow connected to essentially everything else because it's a part of a larger system. And the most natural and I would say fundamental movement of all of them, the one that really makes us stand out the most as human beings, is the gait pattern or the walking pattern. And like no other animal or creature can do it. Like if you're walking through a forest, let's say, and you see somebody walking upright, okay, it's not a bear because when they try to walk upright, it's funny looking. Maybe it's a Bigfoot, can't rule that out. Who knows? But it's
Just can't rule it
probably
out. That's right.
we just don't know, folks. I wish I could say no way, but it doesn't work like that. So, but the what's really cool about it is that learning how to recruit every muscle in your body at the same time for one specific purpose has great impact on your overall fitness and strength. And what a lot of people tell me is their sense of resilience too, because again, just something as simple as crawling, which is one of the movements that I include in the book, and you don't have to do it outside in your backyard, so you don't have to get your neighbors calling like the I don't know, like the police, like I think this person's on drugs, and you can do it in the comfort of your living room. Or similarly, what's called loaded carry, which is basically you just pick up a weight, kind of like you'd carry a suitcase, and you just take it for a walk. You wouldn't think it would be a great exercise, but you'd be amazed at what muscles you feel firing up, how much your heart and lungs get in on the equation. And I have a couple of other movements in there like that as well. And it's designed in workouts that you can finish in about 9 minutes. And if you already have a particular exercise program that you're doing and that you really enjoy, it's also designed to be done in conjunction with those programs.
Okay.
So most of the people who do it tell me that they do it either as a warm up for their regular training or as kind of like a finisher for their training. But it's not designed around these big scary movements with a lot of technique that you're going to be unfamiliar with, but rather the technique you're already very, very familiar with, which is just walking and doing it in a variety of different ways, or using the pattern, let's say, in a variety of different ways that help to recruit a lot of different muscles that you may never have really spent any time training. And it's a lot of fun too. So I think I would be remiss if I didn't point that out, because your exercise is not supposed to be a huge drudgery. It should be, maybe not a laugh a minute, thrill ride, but certainly it should be fun and enjoyable. And the 9-minute challenge is designed to be exactly that.
Yeah, because I think that's why a lot of people quit. Is that, as a general rule, working out is not fun, especially if you're trying to do it by yourself, or
Yeah.
you're going to one of those gyms that you're talking about. You're in some kind of you're waiting. Yeah, well, I spend all
Yeah.
my time waiting for the machine that I want, or I'm in some cycle that I'm going through, and I get to the machine and someone didn't wipe the thing off, and it's all nasty, and I'm like, I'm just going home.
Yeah.
It's just
You're like, I'm going to the gym.
it doesn't take much, right? It doesn't actually take
Exactly.
much for someone to make an excuse not to come back or to stop doing it. It really doesn't.
Exactly. And for me, I've always been a big advocate of finding excuses to succeed rather than excuses to fail. And so the idea with the 9-minute challenge is that you're going to feel energized by the time you're done with it. You're going to feel good. There's going to be some sort of a variation of all these movements that you're going to be able to do. And you don't have to go to some, sweaty, dank gym where, you're going there for the weights, and then instead you go there and you have to wait because everybody's using all the equipment that you want. So all you need is a kettlebell or two and your own fair flesh, your body weight. And before you know it, you're going to be probably feeling quite a bit better, feeling quite a bit stronger. And you're going to be having fun as well, because it's not about giving it 110%. It's not about go hard or go home, because you're probably going to be doing it at home anyway. So mission accomplished on that front. But it's about doing something that you can do repeatedly and that you can enjoy. And most importantly, that you don't have to set aside an hour to do. You can get it done in as little as 9 minutes. So that's an excuse to succeed using stuff that you can learn very quickly. It's another excuse to succeed. And what's more, people can also join my free Facebook group. It's called the Hebrew Hammers Hidden Hideaway. No longer hidden, I guess, because I just, told everybody about it. But that's a great place for a community, because you might find maybe your family doesn't really care about exercise, but you're starting to get really interested in it. So it's good to have like-minded people who can, cheer you on. Very positive place. There's no
Sure.
swearing, there's no showboating, but people like to talk about their accomplishments and their achievements, and they like positive people to cheer them on. And so that's why I put together the Hebrew Hammers Hidden Hideaway. It's a whole lot of fun being there.
All right. So you've got that community on Facebook, and then folks can also go out to 9minutechallenge.com. Where else can they get a hold of you? And where can they get a hold of your books?
Okay, well, the books are on Amazon. That'll be probably the easiest place for everyone to go, because in all likelihood, if you're listening to this on your phone, Amazon has already listened in, and they're going to make suggestions, for my books and maybe any other products that they've heard us talking about here. But I would say probably the best place to go. I'm on most of the social media channels, the meta platforms, Facebook, Instagram. I have a daily video on YouTube as well.
Okay.
So yeah, lots of different places you can find me, but the place that I'm most active for sure, or the place where you're going to get the best, let's say, and most focused introduction to my wily ways, by all means, will be 9minutechallenge.com.
Okay. Great. I really do appreciate you being here. There's some very innovative and different thought processes here. And I think just the concept that you can start down this strength pathway from zero to a pathway in just 9 minutes a day. That's got to be attractive to somebody. Maybe you won't get all the results you're looking for, but you'll start seeing results. And I think that's the most important thing, because so many times we get into these programs that we just don't see the results. Even they say, hey, what's 30 days, you'll see results. Well, it must have been everybody else, because I didn't see any results. I mean, I've heard that so many times. Now, they, of course, don't mention the times that they cheated in there, all those different things, and didn't do exactly what was going on. But who doesn't have at least 9 minutes? I mean, come on. I know we're all busy, but you got 9 minutes. I'm a
Yeah,
pretty daggone busy guy, but I got 9 minutes too. I really ain't got an excuse. I ain't saying I'm not going to make one. No, I'm just kidding. I really should. I'm so I can also go to Amazon and not just buy the books, but I probably can, like you can everything else. I get some kettlebells there too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know what I would say is most people would, I always try to encourage people to, like, it depends on where their emotional level is, but I usually, depending on what they need, I'll try to get them to switch it up accordingly. Like if someone's super gung ho, like I'm going to go out and buy a whole set of kettlebells, try to get them to, like, well, why don't you slow down? Why don't you just get one first, train with that, kind of see how you feel, make sure, because I want people to do this for the rest of their life. I look at it like, it's a hackneyed metaphor at this point, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. Or maybe another
Sure.
way to look at it is that it's a mixture of marathons and sprints. But you want to start off with the mentality that I'm going to be doing this for a while. And I think, for instance, that if you get one kettlebell, by the way, you can get them at Walmart now. Oddly enough, it used to be like impossible to find a kettlebell. You'd have to you have to meet like in the outskirts of town, like, at the loading docks. It was like a drug deal. It was like, hey, you got the stuff, and then they opened their jacket and there's like a 35-pound kettlebell in there, and then you paid them cash. And that was like 2008, folks. It's not like that anymore. You can go to Walmart and you can get a kettlebell. And but I would say, yeah, start with just one, and and take it slow. One of the things I try to get people to understand too is that, like, I remember years ago, I had a lady who came to me for training, and she'd had a lot of difficulty with her consistency. And she said, I'm just a very all or nothing person. And I said, you know what? I don't really believe you, because drove here today. Probably you had certain roads you were able to drive faster on, and others you had to drive more slowly on. Probably had to slow down for some of the turns. You probably had to stop at some stoplights and stop signs. At no point did you say, well, you know what? I can't drive 60 miles an hour anymore, so I'm just going to park on the side of the road. I'll pick up when I've got the time. And so people need to understand, if you're currently going 0 miles an hour in your training, even going 5 miles an hour, In 1 hour, you'll be 5 miles away. I mean, think about it like this. I'm not even asking for an hour. I'm saying you give it 9 minutes and you do that every single day, and you can park your car at the side of the road after that 9 minutes. Within about a week, you're going to be 5 miles away from where you started. Which, granted, I mean, there are some people who are able to jump from 0 to 60, but the thing to keep in mind is that you're going to get a lot farther by going slowly at first, and then as you pick up some speed, taking advantage of that speed that you've picked up, and not giving it 110%, not going hard or going home, not giving it everything you got and leaving it all at the gym, but showing up, enjoying the process, and keeping a mindset of a process oriented goal where the goal is to do every day something, not all or nothing, and just tracking the results. One thing I do is I've got a series of sheets of paper with some cells that I've just written in just by hand and dates on them. Every time I do a certain thing, like create content or do some reading or whatever, I'll just put a nice green check mark in there, and you get used to seeing those green check marks. You do that 30 days in a row, take track of some measurements like how your clothes are fitting, how you look in the mirror, your weight, the kind of energy levels that you have. You're going to be pretty happy, and you're going to say, wow, I didn't have to crush myself to do any of this. And you'll start to look forward to it. You have to take that first little leap of faith, and it's going to take a few days, but most of us are going to get a couple decades older anyway. So what's 30 days? You know what I mean? What's 10 days?
You brought another question to mind, so I want to ask this because you had said that you should start with one.
Yeah.
How do you know what size you should start with?
Great question. Because the kettlebell is an instrument that's uniquely designed for what we would call compound movements, meaning movements that involve a number of different joints and muscle groups. You want to start a little heavier than you think you should, because typically the first movement that you're going to learn is just how to pick the kettlebell up safely. Or, in the case of the 9-minute challenge, just walking around with it. And so for most gentlemen, you'd want to start with a 35-pound kettlebell, or if you're using the metric system. I mean, I don't know why we would. We're in America, forget the. By the way, this total side note. I made a joke the other day on some Instagram page that was making fun of the imperial system, our measurement system. And I said, there are two kinds of countries in this world: those who use the metric system and those who have been to the moon. And it did not go over well with the people who use the metric system. But I'm still getting likes on this. I'm still getting funny comments. So in any case, 16 kilograms if you are using the metric system, or 35 pounds if you're using the We Go to the Moon system, the imperial system. And then for ladies, it would be about 25 pounds or about 12 kilograms to start off with. And again, it's going to sound like, oh my gosh, that's way too much. But you're not going to be doing bicep curls. Great exercise, but it's just not really what the kettlebell is best designed for. What you're going to be doing is stuff like what are called deadlifts, which sounds scary, but it's just lifting the weight off the ground. And that's just to kind of get you prepared for stuff like swings, which are great movement, or squats, things of that nature. So you learn how to use your whole body. So it's not like you're using one muscle at a time, where you would want to start with a smaller weight. You're going to be starting with a bigger weight because you're going to be using a lot of muscles. And so that's the best way to make sure that they're actually feeling like they're doing some work. So for gents, the typical recommendation is would say gentlemen of let's say average strength. Like I started with 25 pounds because as we discussed earlier, I was, let's say, below average in strength. I've since moved up for sure, but most gentlemen, I would say 35 pounds if you're an average level of strength. If you have a powerlifting background, you might start with something like 45 or 55 pounds, something like that. But otherwise 35 works very well. And you will still, I had a workout today that involved a 35-pound kettlebell for quite a few sets. So you're always going to find some way to use even the lighter weights as you get stronger. Ladies, it's the exact same thing. Usually 12 kilograms or 25 pounds or thereabouts is going to be a great place for you to start. If it's a few pounds in either direction, you're probably going to be just fine. But that's what I would recommend. And I would avoid the urge to go get a whole big set of them. I would try to wear out that single kettlebell that you get, really get the most use out of it, and then start investing in more. You want to take on the mindset of, little by little, and not, I'm going to go all in and then let these become, expensive dust collectors. So
yeah, absolutely. You go and buy a whole set, and 6 months later for sale on eBay is a whole set of kettlebells.
Exactly. And then you're going to get a guy like me, like, oh, I'm going to buy these at a discount because these are used, you know? And so the circle of life goes on, but I want you to have a circle of gains. So I want you to
But
start
the
with the lighter
shipping
weight.
on that's going to be rough. I can just tell you right now, the shipping
Yeah.
is not going to be free on that
Yeah.
whole set of
Oh
kettlebells.
no, I'll tell you, my coach and mentor and friend, Scott Stevens, guy who taught me the kettlebell kung fu all those years ago. He's told me stories about driving up to like Minneapolis, St. Paul, or some of the other Midwestern places to assist or learn at kettlebell certifications, and they would have the opportunity for you to buy a lot of kettlebells. He said one time he bought like 600 pounds worth of kettlebells and put them. He had to put them just right in his car, but he said that like from the outside, you could see it was
Level
sitting
it up.
quite a bit lower. Yeah. He told me he had his license and registration ready, just expecting that, in the 6 hour drive home, he was going to get pulled over. Like, what's this guy shipping,
Right,
across state lines? Is he going to go to
right,
jail? Well, no, it's just cannonballs with handles, sir. Here's my information
right.
and so on and
Where's
so
the
forth.
bodies, sir? Just tell us where the bodies are and make this easy.
Exactly, exactly. And then of course you can't really punish a police officer with like 100 swings for your insolence because, they're the ones who can punish you. So you gotta have your information ready. But yeah,
You
funny
do
story.
and they're going to have to see the evidence because there's almost no chance they're going to buy the fact that
No,
you just purchased 600 pounds of kettlebells and you've got them stashed in different places in your vehicle to level things up.
anything like that. This is a funny story too. A number of years ago, when I was living in Jerusalem, there was a spate of terrorist attacks that had occurred, and I had just gotten back. I was out of the country, and it was when all this started. And I wanted to buy a sledgehammer for exercise related purposes, like particularly for grip strength. So I bought one at the open air market, a very famous market in Jerusalem called Machane Yehuda. And I took a bus, got back home. I was walking to my apartment, and these cops pulled up. They're like, "What are you doing with that? That hammer?" They were just very on guard about anything that looked suspicious. And there was this guy carrying this giant, 10-pound sledgehammer, and I was like, "Oh, it's for exercise related purposes." And the guy's like, "Really? Show me." So I had to show him some exercises. I had to like put myself through a mini workout, and he's like, "Okay, you can go home, but just make sure you don't carry that around everywhere with you." So yeah, I don't even know what he would have done if it was a kettlebell. He'd have been like, I've seen enough Looney Tunes cartoons to know that that looks like a bomb. You're in trouble now. That would have been a very bad story.
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah, you definitely they'd had the squad there and everything, and they finally would have come back and said, it's just a
Yeah, just
piece of metal.
yeah, exactly. But then they would have made me carry it home anyway. They wouldn't have been able to like, we'll give you a lift. They'd be like, well, you brought us all out here, and this is really all your fault. So you're gonna have to carry this home.
You're gonna have to carry that home.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Well, man, it has been a joy to hear all about this, Alex. It's such an interesting, I guess offshoot of a traditional thought process of weight training and such. But as I think about that kettlebell and then just some of the things that you're talking about, even as you're going through that arc type thing, I can
yeah,
see how it would be. And yeah, you folks can't see me on here, but I'm swinging my arm like I've got a kettlebell here, and I'm thinking about the movements and such of how it would develop in a different way, right? How it would give
yeah,
you that strength in such a different way. And I think in a more, I'm trying to think of the best way, in a more usable way. And what I mean by that is these are natural motions that you're doing, the way that you would pick something up, the way you would grab a box and swing it over here or do these
yeah,
things. And so it's strength that you can really use in a more day-to-day natural way than if you're just doing curls. How often are you going over and picking up something in the curl motion that you're
mhm,
going to do over and over whenever you're moving furniture? Yeah, it helps you pick that furniture up. But if you're working doing squats with your kettlebells and you're doing some of those others, when you're moving that furniture, it's the same motion that you're doing there.
yeah. If you think about strength training or resistance in general as breaking into two broad categories, it makes even more sense because it's basically exactly what you're saying. There is ultimately moving objects through free space and then moving our bodies through free space. And the way that we're constructed is that there are just certain general patterns that our body tends to do very well with. And then there are, minor patterns, like you mentioned, a curl. Again, excellent exercise. Certainly nothing wrong with having a gun show, for the ladies or for the gents or whatever. But it's always going to be more useful if it is attached to other movements that you can do in the real world rather than something that is, let's say of primary importance with just how you look. Um, Again, something that's certainly important, but it should fit in with something that helps you to do better at the things you're going to have to accomplish in the real world. And, most importantly, too, is also your health, because there is a very important component in
Right.
your health and fitness, that moving through these natural movements helps to develop the body the way that it's designed to be moved. And if we know anything, it's that the more we move, the more often and the better that we do it, we just have a tendency to have a better quality of life, and also to be able to stave off a lot of the diseases and maladies that
Right.
tend to accrue as we get older. And as a shirt that I once saw said very poetically, death is winning. Do something. And exercise can certainly help in that regard.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's really a lot of chronic illnesses that this can that exercise in general, movement, just movement. I mean, just walking can make a big difference. What if you're not doing anything else? Just walk, uh,
Huge.
because just sitting around watching the shows, that is not going to really end up well for you.
Yeah.
Certainly, a lot of the MSK stuff we have going on, a lot of the mobility issues we have been brought on by people sitting watching shows, getting stuck on Facebook, spending too much screen time, period, just
Yeah.
not using movement. So it is imperative that you do that. Save yourself, save your family, save all of these things, because it's going to catch up with you at some point in time. Your lack of movement is going to catch up and have a very negative effect on your health. So I
Yeah.
really do appreciate you bringing some insight on some very different ways of looking at this. Guys, go out and check out Aleks's website at 9minutechallenge.com. That's the number 9minutechallenge.com. Also, check out his books. You can find those on Amazon. So I'm guessing you have an author page on there, correct? They can go out there and you've got an author page as well.
I hope so. I think I should look it up. We talked about this earlier. I'm like a caveman with a computer.
Oh,
It's
yeah, yeah,
kind of a
yeah, yeah,
miracle I
yeah.
managed to. So if you look up my name, it's spelled funny, but if you look it up, you should find it. And if not, I should probably put together that author page, because that would be certainly very helpful for people.
Yeah, they sent you the link.
Yeah, of course they did, because I remember getting it and I was like, huh, seems like a good idea. I better kick this can down the road. That's what a lot of people do that with fitness. And I'm like, how can people do that? And then here I am, my professional development. They're like, here's an author page. This is important. I'm like, I'm going to kick this can down the road too.
All right. And if you're listening and you're also have written a book and it's on Amazon, make sure you go out there and click on the link so that you have your author page. Don't forget, you can get all kind of tips and tricks here on the Health and Wealth Power Hour. But thanks again. Hey, I do appreciate you being on here and sharing your vast knowledge. Folks, go and check this out. I don't think that you will be disappointed. 9 minute challenge. It sounds like something I personally need to do. Once again, we're busy, busy, busy. All of us are busy, but everyone has at least 9 minutes a day that you can stop, get up from your desk and move. 9 minutes ain't too much. You can go out, as Aleks told us, you can go to Walmart and get you a kettlebell. For the ladies, 25 pounds is a great starting place. For the guys, 35 pounds is a great starting place. Any closing thoughts, Aleks?
Yeah, I would say um, the most important thing is to get started, put one foot in front of the other. Don't think about 3 months or 6 months or 12 months down the line. Think about what you can do today, and find an excuse to succeed, even if it means that you can't get in 9 minutes. If you can do 3 minutes, if you can do 2 minutes, as long as you create that groove in your day where it's kind of like, you ever gone to bed without brushing your teeth and you just can't sleep? You're like, I got to brush my teeth. Something's not right. That's the kind of thing that you want to create in your life, because over the long run, it's going to help you out a lot more. You're going to enjoy the process a lot more, and you'll be probably a lot less anxious about your training. So I really like the suggestion of Canadian psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson to treat yourself the way that you would treat someone who is under your care. That's a great way to do it, just by setting aside a little bit of me time every single day, putting a little bit of invigorating exercise into it so that you can leave feeling more energized than when you came in, not completely zapped of your power and energy. And 9 minutes at a time is a great way to do it. But even if you got to do a little bit less, you have my blessing to do that.
All right, great. Get started, folks. Get started. Thanks for joining us on this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, you can listen to any of the previous episodes and even future episodes. Well, I mean, not yet, but later on you can anyway, at hwpowerhour.com. That's right, hwpowerhour.com. That is where you can also subscribe to the podcast. If you just want to listen to it on the go, you can always find it on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you like to digest your podcast. Also, remember, the last Tuesday of every single month, please join us on a LinkedIn audio room. Why does healthcare suck? That's right. Why does healthcare suck? Our ongoing audio room where we deep dive into all the different issues around our healthcare system and how you can avoid those. Lots of times we have stories and different case studies of what people have gone through. We dive into all different parts of it. We've been through pharmacy. We've been through why aren't employers looking at more alternative health plans. Only 1% of employers in this country actually have an alternative funded health plan that is designed to truly benefit their employees. Why is the number so low? We look at that. We provide answers for you in different ways to look at it. We've had healthcare horror stories. And then, of course, around Christmas time, we even stopped, took a breath, had some positive healthcare hero time. Lots of great episodes out there. Go out and check it out. I'm sure you can find something that you like, and please join us in the future. Thanks again for your time. Hope everyone has a blessed day. We are out.